The sky was no longer dark. It was alive with fire. A deafening roar filled the air as burning sulfur rained down from the heavens. Sodom, once a thriving city, was being reduced to ruins in mere moments. People screamed, running frantically through the streets, but there was no escape. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, and mighty buildings, once symbols of prosperity and strength, crumbled like sandcastles before an oncoming wave. In the midst of this chaos, Lot ran. His heart pounded as he clutched the hands of his daughters, dragging them forward through the smoke-filled air. His wife followed closely behind, their once comfortable life now nothing more than a memory. The words of the angels still echoed in his mind. Flee for your lives. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away. Terror gripped him, but he kept moving. Behind him, Sodom burned. The very land he had chosen for its abundance now turned into a wasteland of destruction. The cries of the doomed filled the air, drowning under the roar of divine wrath. But even as he fled, doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. Had he lingered too long? Had he hesitated when the angels first urged him to leave? Then, in a single irreversible moment, everything changed. His wife slowed her steps. Against every warning, she stole one final glance back at the city she had called home. Maybe she had left behind cherished possessions. Maybe she mourned the life she was forced to abandon. Maybe she simply couldn't accept that Sodom her home. Her past was gone forever. But that single act cost her everything. Lot felt the sudden absence behind him. Turning slightly, he saw her no longer a woman, no longer his wife, but a pillar of salt, frozen in place as if time itself had stopped for her. The wind howled around her rigid form, carrying the scent of sulfur and ruin. She had looked back, and in that instant she was lost. Lot did not have time to grieve. There was no time to question, no time to mourn. He had to keep running. His daughters clung to him, their sobs drowned by the crackling inferno that consumed everything behind them. The city was gone, its people swallowed by judgment. And Lot, once a man of wealth, a man of status, was now nothing but a fugitive fleeing through the barren wilderness. Ahead lay uncertainty, behind him only fire and loss. His journey was far from over, but one truth was now painfully clear: there was no going back. Lot's story didn't begin in Sodom. Long before fire rained from the sky, before he was forced to flee for his life, he was just a boy growing up in the prosperous city of Ur. He was the son of Haran, but tragedy struck early. His father died while he was still young. In those days, losing a father was more than just an emotional wound. It meant uncertainty, vulnerability, and a future filled with questions. But Lot wasn't alone. His uncle, Abraham, took him in, and from that moment, Abraham became more than just family. He became a guide, a protector, and a mentor. Lot traveled with Abraham's household as if he were a son, learning from him, watching how he lived, and witnessing the faith that set Abraham apart from other men. Then came a defining moment. One day, Abraham received a call from God: "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." It was a command that required absolute faith. It meant abandoning everything: wealth, security, and the familiar comforts of home to follow a promise, a future unknown. And Lot went with him. But why? Was Lot a man of faith, like his uncle? Did he believe in the same divine calling? Or was he simply following Abraham because he knew that wherever Abraham went, blessings followed? The Bible doesn't say much about Lot's personal faith at this point, but one thing was clear: he had chosen to go. Whether driven by belief or by the desire for prosperity, he became part of something much bigger than himself. Their journey took them far beyond the borders of Ur. They wandered through the lands of Canaan, living as nomads, sustained by faith and the blessings that God poured out on Abraham. As the years passed, Lot's wealth grew. His flocks multiplied, his herds expanded, and his household flourished. Everywhere Abraham went, success followed, and Lot reaped the benefits of being by his side. But prosperity often brings challenges. The land could only support so many animals, and soon conflict arose. Abraham's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen began quarreling over grazing land and water. The tension grew, threatening to divide them. Abraham, always the man of peace, made an offer that would change Lot's life forever. "Let's not have any quarreling between us. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left." Lot had a choice to make. Would he follow in Abraham's footsteps, seeking land not just for its wealth, but for its spiritual significance? Or would he chase after what looked good, what seemed easiest, without considering the cost? His decision would shape everything that followed. The land was no longer enough for both of them. Abraham and Lot had traveled together for years, and their flocks had multiplied beyond expectation. Their herds of sheep, goats, and cattle stretched across the rolling hills, filling every pasture, drinking from every stream. What had once been a shared blessing had now become a source of tension. Abraham's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen quarreled, their disputes growing more frequent, more heated. The land simply couldn't sustain them both. Abraham, a man of peace, saw the conflict for what it was, a crossroad. He turned to Lot and, with wisdom beyond his years, made a generous offer. "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are family. Look around you. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left." Abraham had every right to choose first. He was older, the leader of the household, the one whom God had called. But instead, he let Lot decide. It was a test, whether Lot realized it or not. A test of his priorities, his values, his faith. Lot lifted his eyes and looked. Before him stretched two distinct lands. To one side, the rugged hills of Canaan, less fertile, more difficult to cultivate. To the other, the lush and well-watered plains of the Jordan Valley. It was a land rich with promise, flowing with abundance, and nestled within it, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot's choice was immediate. He saw prosperity, and he seized it. He chose the fertile lands, the easy life, the place where success seemed guaranteed. But in making that choice, he ignored a deeper truth: not all that glitters is gold. The Bible gives a chilling warning. Now the people of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Lot knew this. The reputation of Sodom was no secret. But still, he pitched his tents near the city, drawn to its opportunities, willing to overlook its darkness for the sake of wealth. What began as a simple, practical decision, a move to a better land, would set in motion a slow but dangerous drift. First, he camped outside Sodom. Then, he moved into the city itself. Eventually, he became one of its leaders, sitting at the city gate, deeply embedded in its culture. Lot thought he could live near sin without being affected by it. He was wrong. This choice, this single, seemingly harmless decision, would lead him down a path of compromise, loss, and devastation. But for now, as he settled into his new home, he had no idea what awaited him. At first, it was just a place to settle. Lot had chosen the Jordan Valley because it was fertile, abundant, and full of opportunity. He told himself it was a practical decision, a wise move for his family and his growing wealth. The fact that Sodom, a city infamous for its wickedness, stood in the heart of that land, that was just a minor detail. He didn't live in the city, after all. He simply pitched his tents near it. But over time, near became inside. At some point, Lot moved beyond the open fields and into the very walls of Sodom. Maybe it started with small conveniences, closer markets, better protection, easier trade, Or maybe it was the allure of wealth, of influence, of belonging among the powerful. Whatever his reasoning, Lot eventually made Sodom his home. And Sodom, in turn, made Lot its own. He no longer lived on the outskirts. He was now part of the city itself. The Bible tells us that he sat at the city gate, a place reserved for elders, rulers, and decision-makers. He wasn't just a resident. He was a leader, someone with influence and status. Somewhere along the way, Lot had gone from being an outsider looking in to being deeply embedded in a place God had already condemned. But what had he gained? Though he held a position of power, Lot had no true authority. Though he had wealth, he had no peace. And though he had made a home in Sodom, he did not belong there. Deep down, he knew it. The Bible describes Lot as tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. 2 Peter 2:8. Day after day, he watched as the people around him grew more corrupt, more violent, more depraved. He saw the sin of the city, felt the weight of it pressing in on him, and yet he stayed. Why? Perhaps he had convinced himself he could make a difference. Perhaps he told himself he had no other options. Or maybe, despite everything, he simply couldn't bring himself to leave behind the life he had built. But Sodom was not a place where righteousness could survive. Lot had made compromises, and compromise always comes at a cost. His morals had eroded little by little, his judgment clouded by the very environment he had chosen. What began as a simple move toward prosperity had now become a trap, a slow descent into a place of no return. And soon, the city he had embraced would crumble beneath the wrath of God. But before that day came, Lot would be forced to make one final choice, one that would determine whether he lived or perished with the city he had come to call home. The night was still when they arrived, two strangers, yet not strangers at all. Lot saw them first as they approached the city gate. There was something different about them, something he couldn't quite place. They weren't like the others who passed through Sodom. They carried no goods to trade, no belongings to suggest they were travelers. Their presence alone unsettled him. Instinct took over. "My lords," he said, bowing low, "please come to my house. Wash your feet. Spend the night. In the morning, you can be on your way." The men refused at first. "No," they said. "We will spend the night in the square." Lot felt his stomach tighten. He knew what would happen if they stayed there. Sodom was no ordinary city. It was a place of lawlessness, of cruelty, where the innocent were preyed upon and wickedness had no limits. He couldn't let them stay out in the open. He insisted. Finally, they agreed, following him home. Lot prepared a meal, offering them bread without yeast, simple, hurried food, the kind made when time was running out. But time had already run out. Before they could sleep, the nightmare began. A mob gathered outside, voices rising in the dark. The men of Sodom had seen the strangers enter Lot's home, and now they demanded them. "Bring them out to us," they shouted, "so that we may have our way with them." Lot's blood ran cold. He stepped outside, shutting the door behind him. His voice was firm but desperate. "Please, my brothers, don't do this wicked thing." The word brothers, he had lived among them too long. His next words were even more shocking. "Take my daughters instead. They have never known a man. Do what you want with them. Just don't harm these men under my roof." It was a moment that revealed how much Sodom had changed him. Even in his attempt to protect the angels, his judgment was clouded. He had lived among wickedness for so long that he had begun to think like them. But the mob didn't listen. They surged forward, ready to break down the door. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The angels reached out, pulled Lot inside, and struck the men outside with blindness. Panic spread through the mob. They groped at the walls, unable to find the door, stumbling like lost men in the dark. Then the angels turned to Lot. Do you have anyone else here, sons, daughters, sons-in-law? Get them out. The city will be destroyed. Judgment was coming. Lot ran through the city, searching for his sons-in-law. Hurry, he pleaded. We have to leave. The Lord is about to destroy this place. But they laughed. To them, it was a joke, a foolish warning from a man they no longer took seriously. They had lived too long in Sodom, and now they were blind in a different way. Lot hesitated. His heart was tangled between two worlds, the life he had built and the truth he could no longer deny. The angels had given him a way out, but could he truly leave? Time was up. And whether he was ready or not, Sodom was about to fall. The sky was still dark when the angels gave their final command. Get up, take your wife and your daughters, and leave this place now. The Lord is about to destroy the city. Lot hesitated. His heart pounded, his mind racing. He had spent years in Sodom, built a life here, his home, his wealth, his standing in the city, everything was here. Even now, with destruction looming, something inside him clung to it. But the angels didn't wait for him to decide. They grabbed him by the hand, him, his wife, and his daughters, and pulled them outside the city. It was only because of God's mercy that they were spared. As they reached the outskirts, the angels spoke one last time. Run for your lives. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away. The urgency in their voices left no room for doubt. The time for hesitation was over. Lot ran, his feet pounding against the hard earth, his daughters gasping for breath beside him. The air behind them grew thick with heat, the wind carrying an eerie sound like a great storm building, but heavier, more terrible. Then it came. A deafening roar filled the sky. Fire fell like rain. The heavens poured down burning sulfur, and the city erupted into flames. The once prosperous streets, the towering buildings, the homes filled with people, all of it was swallowed in an instant. Smoke rose in thick, choking clouds, turning the night into an inferno. The screams of those left behind were lost in the roar of destruction. Lot didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The command was clear, don't look back. But his wife did. Maybe she thought of their home, the life they had built. Maybe she remembered the comforts, the friendships, the things she had left behind. Maybe she simply couldn't accept that Sodom was gone forever. Whatever the reason, in that one moment of hesitation, she turned her head. Lot didn't see it happen. He only heard a sudden silence behind him, felt the emptiness where she had been. He turned just enough to see her standing motionless, her body no longer flesh and blood, but salt, frozen in time, lost in the past she couldn't let go of. The fire raged on. Sodom burned, but Lot and his daughters kept running, tears streaming down their faces, their lungs burning with every breath. There was no going back. There was no saving her. She had looked back, and in that single glance, she was lost forever. Lot had lost everything. He had once been a man of great wealth, living under the blessing of his uncle Abraham. He had chosen prosperity over wisdom, security over faith. Now he stood in the desolate mountains, stripped of everything: his home, his city, his wife. The land that once flourished had been reduced to ashes. The daughters who had fled with him, the only family he had left, had seen the world they knew vanish in flames. Fear consumed them. Without husbands, without hope for the future, they made a terrible decision. In their desperation, they took matters into their own hands, repeating the very cycle of sin that had destroyed Sodom. Lot had escaped destruction, but his choices still followed him. His story did not end with triumph, nor with restoration. Unlike Abraham, whose descendants became a great nation, Lot's legacy was one of strife and sorrow. His daughter's children became the fathers of the Moabites and Ammonites, nations that would later oppose Israel, standing as a reminder of the cost of compromise. And then Lot disappeared from history. No record of his final years, no mention of his death, no legacy of faith left behind. Just silence. But his story still speaks. It warns of the slow erosion of conviction, of how small compromises can lead to irreversible consequences. Lot did not wake up one day and decide to become part of a wicked city. It happened gradually. A tent pitched near Sodom turned into a home inside it. A home inside the city turned into a seat of influence at its gates. And by the time he realized what he had lost, it was too late. It is the same today. How often do people make choices that seem small, harmless, moving towards success, comfort, or security, only to find themselves trapped in something they never intended? How many times do people justify their decisions, believing they can remain unaffected by their surroundings, only to wake up and realize they have become a part of what they once stood against? Lot's wife looked back because her heart was still in Sodom. She had left the city, but the city had never left her. And that is the greatest warning of all. Where is your heart? Jesus himself gave a simple but haunting command. Remember Lot's wife. Luke 17:32. The past can be a heavy weight. The world can be enticing. But when God calls you forward, when he warns you to run from destruction, there is only one choice: go, and don't look back. Lot lingered. His wife turned back. His daughters repeated the sins of the past. But you don't have to. When faced with a choice between faith or compromise, truth or comfort, obedience or hesitation, choose faith, and don't ever look back.